I climb my stairs. I go up to my attic and I sit down and I tell stories. What is that about? I live in North America on Turtle Island, a land of highways, of McDonald's, Walmart stores, a place of bones and ghosts, of roses and crocuses powering their way up out of the dark earth. I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast. I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Mythic Landscape Radio Hour on WRFI, Watkins Glen, Ithaca Community Radio. Today we're going to slip into the other world, accidentally, not on purpose. Just suddenly we'll be there. This is a story from Wales about the mingling of the two places, what's possible and what is not, action and imagination, dream world and everyday, taxes, tires, gasoline, dream language, stories, things you remember from your previous lives. Let us begin. Once there was a king without a queen, and his name was Powell. He lived in a castle, not far from the sea, not far from a great hill called the Hill of Arberth. And one day he went hunting. On his horse, with his hunting dogs, he went into the forest. That wild being with many bodies and many tongues, the grasses, the leaves, the wind whispering through the branches. He went into that darkness and that light, and his dogs snuffled, smelling the ground, searching for tracks, inhaling the history of that ground with every breath. And soon they caught the track of a deer, a stag. They began to follow it, barking through the forest. Soon they startled that stag far ahead. He could see it running, and he urged his horse on, galloping after the dogs. Barking, they all went, seized with this pursuit, with this hunger at the root of all things. Like a needle going through cloth, the stag went here and there, and they followed, writing their story into the land. And then, as he rode, he began to hear another sound. It was the barking of dogs. Other dogs, not his own. It was like an echo smacking off a far cliff wall, but there was no cliff wall there. Still he followed. The dogs barked. The stag ran. Further and further they went into the forest. Then they all burst out into a large clearing. In the center was a dead oak tree. The stag was there with many antlers on its head, the dogs close behind, but also there were other dogs that were pure white with red ears. The stag leapt over the dead oak tree. The white dogs seized on that stag. They brought it down. And Powell rode into the center of this melee of hounds and the stag. He pulled out his sword, and with the flat of that sword in his voice, he drove those dogs away. Heel, go! Heel, scram! And he called to his own dogs, and they came, and they plunged upon that stag, took hold of that stag, and killed it there beside that oak tree. And then a gray man on a gray horse rode out of the trees. Powell looked at him. "Good day to you, sir." "I do not greet you," the man said, "for you have offended me." "What have I done?" said Powell. "You know very well what you have done. You have set your dogs upon this stag, which was my stag. This kill was mine alone, and you have taken it for yourself." "How can I make this good?" said Powell. "How can I repair this rip in the cloth between us? How can I bring harmony to us here?" "There is a way," said the man. "There is a way. You must simply become me for a year, and I will become you. You will ride to my kingdom, and there you will take on my shape and my voice, and you will rule my kingdom for an entire year. At the end of that year, you must fight a man named Halfgan. At a river at the edge of my kingdom, you must fight him. You will strike him a single blow, which will be easy for you to do. And then he will ask for another blow, but do not strike him, for it is by repeated blows that he is made stronger. Victorious in this, you will then return to the palace and then return here to this field. I will meet you here. That is the way to make peace between us. That is the way to make up for what you have done." "But how will this work?" said Powell. "What about my kingdom? And when you were there, won't my people know that you were there? Won't it seem strange that you were there as the king for a year?" "By my craft and art," the man said, "I will make certain that no one knows the difference. You, Powell, will look like me, and I, Arawn, Lord of Annwvyn, well, I will look exactly like you. No one will know the difference. Your own dogs and horses will not be able to smell the difference. And have no fear. I will rule your kingdom wisely and well. Do you agree to this?" Powell looked at this man, Arawn, Lord of Annwvyn. He looked at him, and he said, "I agree." And as he said those words, a wave went through the air as a ripple through water, and suddenly he was looking at himself. There he was, on a brown chestnut horse, dressed in his hunting clothes, and he looked at his own arms, and they were dressed in a gray cloak, and his horse was gray beneath him, the color of a rain cloud. And the man, Arawn, now in the shape of Powell, said, "Very well, I will see you in a year." And he turned and began to ride away, and Powell's dogs followed him. But Powell looked around. He cried out, Wait, how do I get to your kingdom?" "You are already there," the man said. "But if you need a way, follow that sparrow there. Follow that sparrow, and you'll get to my kingdom." And Arawn, in the shape of Powell, rode off into the trees, and Powell's dogs went with him. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, the white dogs were around him, licking his horse, happy there, and he looked, and he heard a sparrow in a tree, and he rode towards that sparrow and its song. And then the sparrow went deeper into the forest, and he followed. It was autumn. The dead leaves were rustling around the hooves of his horse. A cold wind was in the air. Still the sparrow sang, moving deeper into the trees, into the forest. Powell, in the shape of Arawn, followed. And now, as he and the dogs and he on his horse went through that forest, well, he looked, and crocuses were there on the ground. Crocuses and small flowers muscling their way up out of the earth. And then birds began to sing, and then there were buds on the trees. Still the sparrow sang. Still he followed that sparrow. And then there was a sound in the air. It was leaves on the trees, rustling and whispering in the wind. The trees were in full blossom. It was high summer. They were filled with leaves. And then he came to the edge of that forest and looked out at a field. And in this field there was a river, and beside that river there was a great palace. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, rode towards that palace. And when he got there, the guards at the door welcomed him. "Welcome, your majesty," they said. "Welcome home. How was your hunt?" "It was good," he said. And servants took his horse away to be cared for. And he went in through the hallways of this beautiful palace to a large feasting hall. And a woman was there, a queen, the queen, and she came and squeezed his hands and kissed him on the cheek. "Welcome home, my love, welcome home." And they sat down, and there were bards singing songs about the beginning and the end of the universe and all that had happened in between. And there was food, there was bread, there was ale, there was roast meat. It was a joyous occasion. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, enjoyed the company of the queen. And he thought to himself, "I have never been with such a beautiful, charming, strong, and wise woman before." And when that feast was over, everyone retired to their bedrooms. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, retired to the royal bedroom with the queen. And they sat down on the bed, and he bid her good night, and he lay down. And he stayed on one side of the bed, and she stayed on the other, as though a sword were on the sheets between them. So that night passed. The next day, Powell, in the shape of Arawn, had to make decisions. He made them as best he could. He ruled that kingdom as well as he could. And there was a feast at the end of that day, and again he and the queen retired to the royal bedroom. But again it was as before. They slept on either side of the bed as though a sword were between them. So time went on, one season pouring into the other like water from one bucket to the next, held there, splashing there, and the birds sang in the summer, and autumn came, and winter came, and spring came again, and summer came again. Soon a year had passed in that place. And it was the time for Powell, in the shape of Arawn, to face this man known as Halfgan. And his ministers prepared him, his lords and his servants. They got his horse ready. They gave him a great lance and a shield as well, and a spear. And off they went, riding through the forest. And they went to the edge of the kingdom of Annwvyn, where a river was flowing. And they stopped at the bank of that river. And on the other side there was another man dressed in blue. And his people were with him, servants, guards, people with swords and spears. And a man walked into the center of the river and stood in its flowing current. And he said, "This conflict is between these two kingdoms, but it will be resolved by these two kings alone." And he walked out of the water. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, approached the river, and the other man, Halfgan, approached as well from the other side. And at a signal from one of the servants, the two of them rowed towards each other across the water, holding on to their lances and their shields, and then, bam, they met in the center of that river, and their shields and met the lances at exactly the same moment. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, his shield held, while the shield of the other man, Halfgan, it split, and the lance went into his side, and he was propelled off the back of the horse and down into the water. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, leapt from his horse and pulled out his sword and stood over the man, his blood already moving down the flowing of the river. And he looked down at the man with his shining sword in his hand, and the man said, "Stranger, stranger, you had no reason to strike me in this way. But now that you have done so, finish what you have begun." And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, stood there with his sword high in the air, gleaming in the light. And then he remembered the words he'd been told, and he sheathed his sword, and he said, I will not strike you a second time." "Then I am done for," said the man. And he called to his servants, and they lifted him out of the flowing water, and put him on the back of a horse. And they all rode sadly away. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, he went back to the palace with all of his people. And that night there was a feast. It was the last night, and again he enjoyed the sparkling wine, and the bread, and the cheese, and the roast meat, and the cakes made by the cook of this palace. And he enjoyed the company of the queen, and her laugh, and the light in her eyes, and her charming stories, and her beauty. And then when the feast was over, he and the queen retired to the royal bedroom. And they said good night, and as before, as every night before, the two of them slept on either side of that bed, and there seemed to be a sword between them. The next day, Powell awoke, he got on a horse, and he left that palace. And he rode away from that river, and he rode into the trees. And there was a sparrow there, singing. He followed that sparrow. The sparrow went deeper and deeper into the forest. The trees were filled with green leaves. The sparrow sang. Powell followed that sparrow here and there. Deeper in they went. Soon the leaves of the trees turned brown and yellow and orange. They fell down to the earth. They rustled beneath the hooves of his horse. Soon the trees were empty of leaves. Soon everything was withered, and a cold wind was blowing, bone dry, through the branches of those trees. Still the sparrow sang, leading Powell in the shape of Arawn to the field. And he came to this field, and there was the dead oak tree in the center of that field. On his horse he went to it. He looked down, and there were the bones of the stag, bleached white by rain and by wind. There was the skull, the wind whispering through the eye holes of that skull. And then he heard the galloping of a horse, and a man, who was himself, came riding out of the trees. And he said, Greetings to you, Lord of Annwvyn. How goes it with you today?" Very well, said Powell in the shape of Arawn. I hear you have fought Halfgan, and you have been victorious. Yes, said Powell. Very good. Thank you for what you have done. And as he said those words, a ripple passed through the air as a ripple passes through water. And Powell, in the shape of Arawn, found he was looking at a man in gray on a gray horse. It was Arawn, Lord of Annwvyn. And he looked down at his hands and his arms, and they were his own once more. And his horse was a brown chestnut horse, just as it had been before. Thank you for what you have done, said Arawn, Lord of Annwvyn. Let there be peace and harmony between us. And he rode off into the trees, into the forest. And he went this way and that way, until he came to the field, until he came to the river and to the palace. And he was welcomed there by servants. They took his horse away to be cared for, and he went into a great feast. And the queen was there, and she welcomed him. And when that feast was over, he and the queen retired to the royal bedroom. And there he held her in his arms, and there they shared the delights of love. And when the time was right, she, the queen, said, My love, why is it, this last year, there has been no sweetness between us, no words of comfort and intimacy? Why is it that you have been so cold this last year? For you know as well as I, there has been no sweetness in this bedroom. And Arawn told her what had happened, told her how he and this man Powell had changed places, and how in fact Powell had been the one there in the royal bedroom. And did she say, "Ah, what a wonderful plan"? And did she say, "Oh, that's good to know"? No, she slapped him on the side of the face and said, "You idiot, why didn't you tell me? I could smell the human world on him when he came here, of course. But I didn't know of this. He just came into this place. What did you think, not telling me all about this plan?" And he spoke to her, and he groveled, and he said all that had been in his heart, and he shared his troubles and how he'd made this decision and that, and he spoke beautiful, heartfelt words. And after some time, they made up. And Arawn also realized what a true and faithful king Powell had been while in that kingdom. Meanwhile, Powell, dressed as himself, being himself, he rode through that forest and returned to his castle. And he was welcomed there by the servants and the ministers, and he walked down the halls, and there was a feast there as well. And there was wine and cake and bread and cheese and ale, all the good things of this world, the gifts of the earth, brought to the table for us to enjoy. That beautiful, sweet moment that is the banquet, where our hunger is satisfied, where contentment comes like a star landing in our palms and then vanishing. So he enjoyed that banquet, and towards the end, he went aside to one of his ministers, and he said, "Tell me, I'm wondering how my kingship is doing, how I'm doing as king of this realm. Can you tell me, how was it this last year? Am I learning anything? Am I doing better than the year before? How did it go, do you think? Speak to me honestly." And the man said, "Powell, surely you've learned a great deal. For this last year I felt you were a strong and a fierce and a gentle and a wise king. You were fierce when you needed to be, and you were generous when you needed to be. The people are happy, the kingdom is well. I would say even the earth itself is happy that you are king of this realm. You've done a wonderful job." "Thank you," said Powell. "That's good to know." And when that feast was over, Powell went up to the royal bedroom, and he lay down and he tried to sleep. But the thing is, he couldn't sleep. He kept remembering all that had happened. He kept remembering those dogs, the white dogs with the red ears. He kept remembering the laughter of the queen in that other kingdom. Halfgan there, speaking with him from the river, lying down in the river, his blood flowing away with the current. And he thought also of the bones of the stag in the field, and the wind whispering through them. So he could not sleep. So instead he got up from that empty bed and went to the window of his room. And he looked out at the sea. I grew up in a Christian culture, which is the United States. I grew up in upstate New York, which is part of that larger culture. And this culture, whether we go to church or not, is around us and gives us certain ideas about the world and about ourselves and our lives. One of those ideas is that heaven is far away. Heaven is up there. Hell is down there. Heaven is up there, and that's where the magic happens. That's where eternal life happens. That's where miraculous things occur. And only God is capable of magic acts, more or less. God or his close, those who are very close to him, such as saints or Jesus Christ. Here in this story, which comes from Wales, we have a different conception of the other world, of magic. The character in the story, known as Arawn, is Lord of Annwvyn, spelled in that wild and beautiful way, Annwvyn. Lord of Annwvyn. Annwvyn means the other world. It also, literally, it means the in-world. The in-world. So the Celtic view here is that the other world, capital O, is right here, around us. It is coterminous, right? Is that the right word? It's right where we are. It's just we aren't aware of it. We're not on its frequency. But you can slip into it by accident. You can wander around at night, drunk, and walk in through a door in a hill, and you're there. You can look at things in a different way, and you're there. Some people are more sort of prone to this than others. And it's not always a good thing. It's often a bad thing that you go to this other world, and you were there, and maybe you eat some food, and you end up staying there forever, for example. So these ideas are prevalent in many places outside the Christian realm in the world today, so I'm told. And so I suppose I saw in part in Bali, for example, when I was there. The other world is here with us. The spirits are around if we can just connect with them in some way. But here in America, it's a different story. It's a Christian culture, and so this idea of the other world is heaven, and that is far away. You get there when you die. You don't go there accidentally on the way home at night in the dark. You don't fall into it by taking the wrong road somewhere. So I find that very interesting, and I like that idea, and I like that about this story. Which on the surface can seem just a sort of interesting story about this human guy who goes and switches places with another. But once you see that as the other world, then it's very interesting. And even if I wasn't to tell you that, it's already kind of strange, right? I mean, what is this king, Arawn? What's his strategy here? He's got a problem, which is he's got this guy that apparently he can't fight. He can't succeed in killing him. He needs someone from another kingdom, a human, I'm going to say, someone from the normal world to fight this guy. And how does he do that? How does he find this person? Well, the other world, the in-world, works by indirection. It works obliquely and from the side. He doesn't go on a quest to find a human who will do this, or perhaps he does, but his quest is different from how we may conceive it. Instead, this fellow, Pwyll, or Powell, or Pwech, actually, in Welsh, Pwech is how you say his name, falls into this sort of snare. He puts his dogs on a stag, which this other guy was pursuing, and does this offense to this man and must make up for it by changing places. So it's all very roundabout and complex in an interesting way to me. And it's accomplished in that way. It's not just really clear. And that seems true to me, that feels true to me. Because we, in our human way, accomplish things in a certain way. You have a problem, you solve it, blah, blah, blah. We do this. We want to build a table. We cut down a tree. We build a table. There it is. But the other world, to use that term, solves its problems in an entirely different way. And how is it the other world? Why do we call it that? Well, on the one hand, there's the word in Welsh, Annwvyn, like I said. But there's also some qualities of it, like this man who, by repeated blows, is made stronger. That's already a clue that something's sort of backwards in this other realm, this other kingdom. Also, the dogs that are pure white with red ears. White is often the color of otherworld animals in Celtic mythology and culture. So that's also a clue that something strange is going on here. And, of course, the passage through the forest, which begins in autumn and he gets there and it's summer, as though that realm is a realm of bounty and flourishing of life. So all of those clues, to me, say that this isn't just a simple sort of adventure story, but it's more about a transaction, a relationship between these two kingdoms, the one and the other world and the, quote, normal world. This story is the beginning of the Mabinogion, the Mabinogi, which is a collection of Welsh stories written down about 1300 in the Common Era, but possibly are much older than that. They are pre-Christian, which is why I brought that up. They, unlike the Arthurian stories, they don't have this overlay of Christian imagery and values on top of them. So they're very interesting in that way. The story immediately following this is the story of Pwech and Rhiannon, or Powell and Rhiannon, as I have chosen to call them. And I've recorded that story as well. You can seek it out on my website. And that's a direct answer to this story, because this king without a queen arrives from the other world to him. And it seems that is a sort of gift, or he has shown himself to be worthy of that because of his conduct in this story, which we're looking at today. And as to what this means for us, how this story pokes us or simmers us in some kind of sauce we need to be simmered in, well, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe you do. And as I've often said, a way into that is to think back on this story and find a moment which clutches at you, which snags you, which bothers you. The bones of the stag there, that one sticks with me. The slap in the bedroom as well. The dogs, the sound of the other dogs like an echo in the forest. And perhaps this story is a reminder to value the indirect ways of doing things, the oblique ways of doing things. And we follow our desires, like Powell, like Pwech does in the forest, following his desire to catch a deer. That's all he wants. And on the way, he falls into this other relationship. It's like going to the supermarket, or going to your job, in the process of earning money, buying food to live, the basic things to live, you fall into this relationship with what is beyond your life, which is larger than your life, which is this magical realm, which is next door to yours and perhaps right there. So perhaps that's what this story has to say to us, that we should value those other ways of being, other ways of working. And whether we see that in the natural world or in others or around us in some other way. And it's interesting, too, that this otherworld king, Arawn, can't kill this man, Halfcan, who is harassing him, apparently. I mean, he's a king, right? You'd think he could kill this one guy. But for some reason, he's unable to, or it's against the rules in some way. I'm reminded of a story told by Martin Prechtel called The Toebone and the Tooth. And in that story, there is a human, and a goddess falls in love with this human. And the parents of the goddess don't want this relationship to go on, because then the gods will be related to the humans, and that'll be a bad thing. So the gods want to stop this, but they can't just go and kill the human boy who's in love with the goddess, because that's basically against the rules. They have to find a more roundabout way of doing things. So I'm reminded of that, and perhaps the other world, perhaps the larger world, follows rules larger than our human way of solving things. Well, our human way, our modern industrial Western way of solving things. I'm also reminded of something I heard Joel Glansberg say once. He's a man who thinks about pattern a lot. And he was talking about the Inuit and how it's very cold up there in the far north, and how the modern solution to that, as far as shelter goes, is to build a indestructible house out of concrete or something like that and heat it up. Whereas the traditional Inuit solution is, hey, it's cold, so there's a lot of snow. So we're going to build a house out of snow. So that's very interesting. That's a solution which takes the conditions caused by the problem as the means by which that problem is solved, right? It's a solution which takes the conditions caused by that problem as the means by which that problem is solved. So it's a roundabout way. And perhaps this way of solving things, such as Arawn in this story, who solves his problem of this dispute with another king by, getting a human to do it through this elaborate situation with the stag and the deer, with the stag, that is. Perhaps that's similar to our relations with the natural world and what they should be. Instead of just getting what we want, we should find ourselves ensnared in larger relationship. Well, certainly we do find ourselves ensnared in larger relationship, right? We want to have less panthers in the woods, so we shoot them and we reduce their population. And then we got tons of deer, and they get hit by our cars. And we've also got tons of ticks, which carry a bacteria, Lyme disease, which makes us sick. So we don't go to the woods anymore. So just another, example of the complicated way the natural world works. And in the other world, in this story, I feel a similar complexity of relationship happening. You can't perceive it all. I was once down in Florida, and I was at a party talking to a man who had been instrumental in writing the LEED specifications for buildings. Those are the specifications which, if you're LEED certified, right, your house is like totally ecologically cool, or so I'm told. So I was there on the beach with him and a bunch of other people, and I have to admit, I wanted to test this guy. I was curious what he was about, and Mars was up there in the sky above the ocean. Campfire, people drinking beer, stars, and there's Mars up there. And so I said, what do you think about going to Mars? And he said, more or less, I think it's a great idea. And I'm excited by the challenge of it. And I also think that, honestly, we're going to need a plan B. That's what he said. And he was a man who, as I said, had worked with LEED certification for houses. So an ecological sort of fellow, I would have thought. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because that way of thinking is at the root of our problems right now with the natural world, which we are part of, it seems to me. And the Christian worldview is related to that. Heaven is a place beyond. We can get there. And you hook that up to ideas of progress, which are racist in some ways. And this is what we get, is the world we live in now. We're going to get to a place where the earth is unnecessary to us. That's our goal. That's our ultimate goal. The earth is unnecessary. It's a little bit like a teenager wanting to be free of his parents. Someday, Mom and Dad, I'm out of here and I'm on my own. Yes. Mother Earth, Father Sky, do not need you anymore. And, I'm not going to be diplomatic here. I think that's the root of our problem, why we're about to kill ourselves off as a species. because we are taking ourselves out of the food chain, so we believe, and we're thinking we can make the earth unnecessary, and so the earth is going to make us unnecessary and vestigial and not here anymore. And so a story like this, which comes from at least 700 years ago, perhaps more, I'm inspired by its vision of a magical world that coexists with ours in the very same place. And it's right here. And it's not something beyond that we're going to get to, but something we can slip into in the right frame of mind. Perhaps after hearing the right kind of song, after stumbling down the wrong alleyway in response to the question, the riddle we heard in a dream, which we can't quite remember, but our misremembering sends us around the block to that pine tree where the coyote looks at us with his yellow eyes. So, not to editorialize forever, but just to riff off this story, which inspires me, and I hope it inspires you and lives in your heart in some generous way. And perhaps on the way to feeding ourselves, on the way to the restaurant or the supermarket, we will find ourselves snagged by some agenda larger than anything we can conceive, and we'll end up as royalty in another kingdom, as we will end up as the king or the queen in another kingdom, given a task we don't quite understand and seems backwards to every way we have of understanding the world. Perhaps if we're lucky or unlucky or just human, that will happen to us. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are more stories on my website, which is jayleeming.com, JayLeeming.com. And thanks to the Patreon supporters who help to make this possible. That is very reassuring for me and helps to make this go on. I aspire to tell more stories from other parts of the world. I aspire to plunge into this storehouse of wisdoms that humans have gathered from being on this earth for thousands of years. That's what the stories are. They're a storehouse. That's where the wisdom is. These are old indigenous knowledge systems coded into these stories, and not even exactly coded, because children can understand them, and so can we. We feel them in our blood and our bones, and maybe when we're lucky in our mental thoughts as well. Thank you for listening to these stories. May the coyote bark and the sparrows sing. Take care.